It is July 4th, 2016, and this is episode 54 of the Unseen Podcast. The Unseen Podcast is the unscripted, unedited, open participation, Creative Commons spinoff of the Wow Signal. To learn more about the Wow Signal, go to wowsignalpodcast.com. To learn more about this podcast, go to unseenpodcast.com. This is your producer and host, Paul Carr. And with me tonight are, actually, tonight for them, today for me, are Adam Synergy Smith.
Hey, Paul. Happy 4th of July to
yes,
you and to all of my American friends.
Yeah. I was, it's been about a fairly muted day here, but we enjoy it. Let's see. And we also have, for only the second time, and Gita Jaisinghani. Hello, Gita.
Hi, Paul. Great to be here.
And now, Gita has been on before, but it was a few months ago. So if you want to learn more about her or Adam, go to our panelist page at unseenpodcast.com. And our new panelist tonight is Daniela De Paulis. Hello, Daniela.
Hi, Paul, and hi, everyone in the panel and everyone watching. I'm very pleased to be in this podcast, Hangout.
Why don't you just give us a short version of who you are?
Sure. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm an artist. I work with scientists. I collaborate with specialists from different fields. So my projects are really interdisciplinary, and I'm now a panelist for the Wow Signal podcast, which I am very pleased with because I'm also part of the SETI International SETI Committee. So I'm very interested in radio astronomy and SETI, and I hope to contribute in the Wow Signal podcast with programs about SETI, big history, art, and the humanities. So it's a very, also SETI itself is a very interdisciplinary science.
Right. Now, Danielle, something that you alerted me to a few weeks ago that I did not know about, and I'm glad you did, is the Kickstarter for Earthling's Quest, which we did episode 7 of season 3 for the Wow Signal on that, and you interviewed the production team plus Douglas Vakoch. Now, we want to encourage people who have not. You don't have to listen to that episode, but go over to the Earthlings Quest Kickstarter. We'll have a link in the show notes for this episode. I think they have a couple days left, right? So if you want to see this, what they call a sci-fi documentary, or it's really a documentary about SETI. I think it would not just a few bucks from everybody who would want to see that would probably put them over the top. So
yes. I agree. It sounds like a really interesting documentary about SETI and METI. So SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and METI is Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and they are both covered by this documentary. And I hope they will reach the target, although, as you said, they're not quite there yet, but we should help them in this last couple of days.
And don't be worried about the fact that they want money in Swedish krona.
I think
they'll convert it for you.
Yeah, I can imagine that can put people off because it sounds like thousands of, but actually the conversion.
Well, I went and looked at it and said, wait a minute, how much am I contributing? but yeah, you can find out easily how much you want to contribute is in Swedish krona. So tonight, we really wanted to find out. One of the reasons I wanted to have Daniela on was we've really not really dealt much with this on this podcast about. We've talked a lot about SETI. We've talked a lot about science. We've talked a lot about the search for extraterrestrial life. We haven't talked much about messaging to extraterrestrials, but we have one thing we've really not talked about at all is art, and at least not art in the sense in the the capital A art. We've talked a little bit about science fiction which is a form of art, I suppose. But and we've talked about occasionally about movies or music. But what have we? Is this thinking that I have, and then a lot of other people have, that art is one thing and science is another thing? You really haven't respected that boundary, have you?
Yes, that's right. I think I've never been interested in boundaries to start with. So I always I think since I was actually a young child, I always received a very interdisciplinary education, and I think that really helped me. I hear a lot from my US friends that you are now developing this concept of STEM to STEAM, so introducing the arts and the humanities in the science and technical education. I think that's a good concept. In my case, I think it really helped me to perceive always all these different fields as something which are part of the same interest for knowledge, and so I think in a way that made it really natural for me to work with people from different fields like SETI and scientists. And I think as an artist, I'm mostly interested in the philosophical aspects of science, of course, and all the social aspects of science. So there are many layers, I think, to what I do and my research. So.
I've always, not being an artist myself, I often confront art with a little bit of confusion. Now you don't really, I don't see on your website anyway a lot of you explaining your art. You more just present it, right? Is that pretty much, you don't like explaining it, or you will explain it, or?
Well, I first point that you mentioned is you're confused about art. I think we are all confused, including artists. So I don't know whether this makes you feel any better, but really, I think as an artist, you are always moving into a new territory each time you do a new project, or even for example, one of the projects that I started a few years ago in 2009 was called Optics. It was really experimental back then, and now after a few years, I see how it was really evolving, and so I think confusion is good. There is a positive aspect to confusion, which I think should be appreciated. And scientists, I think, also work with the same feeling of venturing into the unknown. So, and every time you venture into something new, there is always some degree of fear, confusion, or whatever you want to call it. As for explaining my work, I actually make a lot of presentations, and I also I'm a guest researcher at the University of Amsterdam, so I give lectures about my research, and I publish papers. So I'm also a bit of a researcher. And I think my website is not the best representation of my work, because it's not very well kept, I have to say. So I'm sorry about that. But if anybody here listening to this podcast wants to know a little bit more about my work, I can send you papers that I published.
Are these papers in English, or?
Yeah, sure, in English, and published by international journals like Leonardo, METI Journal, or well-known scientific journal in English. Yes.
Okay, good. Now, let's talk. The thing that really got my attention when I first looked at it was this Moonbounce. What you call visual moonbounce. Can you kind of tell us what's going on there?
Yes, this was a project perhaps that I think this was the project that really started my interest in science. I've always been interested in astronomy, but I think this really led me to work with astronomers and radio astronomers. the idea I had when I wanted to start this work was quite simple. The idea was to use this technology for reflecting visual data of the moon surface. And I knew about the Moonbounce technology because it's a technology that I guess also people here will know that it was used after the Second World War as an espionage tool by the US Navy. And the technology basically allows to listen to radio signals that are reflected by the moon surface. So if you have two radio stations on Earth, one radio station transmitting and another receiving, you will be able to listen to what the other radio station has been transmitting. So this was the espionage usage, but also there are radio amateurs who purposefully transmit signals to the moon surface, and they listen to the reflection on other places on Earth. So it's a really experimental, really playful technology in a way for them. So I thought, okay, let's see if we can also visualize this technology, because I knew that it has always been used for sound and especially male voice. It was a really male technology, and I wanted to see what the reflection of the moon on an image would look like. So that's how I started this idea and this research. And and optics is one of the projects that I developed, but it is really fun to present, because people from all around the world send me images for the moon reflection. So it's a very global project.
Mm-hmm. Gita.
Yeah, Daniela, I was wondering, why was this a project that you chose, the Moonbounce project? What, as an artist, made you think that this would be an interesting expression of the work that you do?
Yes, well, as I said earlier, when I started it, I was just interested in the idea of seeing the distortion on an image. So I heard some sounds that were reflected off the moon surface, and I found it really fascinating, because I think the distortion, the echo of these sounds really make you think, oh gosh, this sound has actually traveled approximately 800,000 kilometers. So, and you start thinking about all the fact that these radio waves have actually hit the moon surface. And so I found that really fascinating. But I just wanted to see what, because we're visual animals, and of course visual culture is so strong. I was very interested in seeing the result of this reflection on visual, on images, on video. And so this was the initial idea. And I think when I implemented the technology into an art project, into a live performance, that is where I think it took life of its own, because at that point, I think it became so participatory, and people started sending me images and they wanted to participate. I kind of let it grow a bit on its own. So, and that's why I said, when I started this project, for me, it was a bit jumping into the unknown, because I was actually, the project was ahead of me. It was really leading, and I was following as an artist. So I think it was really interesting, and I got a lot of input from the scientists, and so it's been really a great experience, I think.
So is that what kind of organically led you from in the STEM to STEAM paradigm?
No, I think I mentioned STEM to STEAM because I think when we talk about boundaries between science, art, or humanities, or I don't know, technical skills, We tend to think of them as separate fields, but perhaps for artists it's more natural to think in a more comprehensive way. So I never perceive those boundaries. But I think if you can also, since a young age, if you can have that kind of education at school, perhaps also people are trained to think more interdisciplinary, and I think this can be quite a powerful way to I think challenge the way we study. We think about everything really. So, but I don't really I don't consider my project educational. Although I know now that the technology that I developed is used also for education because it's an open source technology. I don't consider my project as educational per se, but anyone can do whatever they want with the technology, of course.
Adam, do you have something?
I've seen one of Daniela's performances back in 2010, I think, 2011 maybe. You did one for a Global Astronomy Month event. I watched it as a Google Hangout, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's very clever use of the technology. You must have had a fairly dedicated team of radio astronomers, amateur radio enthusiasts working with you to achieve your aim. You know, to start out, it's a very good idea to say, I wonder if we can bounce a picture off the moon. It's a very difficult thing to actually do it. So yeah, congratulations, Daniela, for that.
Well, Adam, you brought up a very good point. Yes, as an artist, I bring my ideas onto the table, but the technical team is really needed for this kind of thing. So I'm not a radio amateur myself, although I've been thinking of getting my radio license for several years. But the people I work with, they are incredible. They are really incredibly skilled, and the Moonbounce technology is really I think, the most difficult ham radio technology. So that's where only very few people can succeed in making this connection by the moon, because it requires a lot of skills. So yes, they're very smart guys, and yes, thanks.
Now, Daniela, I've been wondering lately. Now, there's been just in the last year a lot of renewed interest in METI, partly because of Yuri Milner's breakthrough messaging initiative, which promises to put a decent amount of funding behind it, and I know METI International has come up, and you interviewed Douglas Vakoch recently about that. Are you going to get involved in that at all? Do you think art has a place in that message?
Yes, absolutely. I think Doug Vakoch has already been contacting several artists, also myself. I know Doug Vakoch from conferences, and we've met several times. So I know his intention is really to create a panel of specialists from different fields, including art, philosophy, anthropology, science, and create together a message that is the result of these consultations among specialists. So I know I'm aware of all the this debate around transmitting or not. So that is always a big, I think, issue within SETI and METI. So, but I think it's really good as you know, as an exercise to think about what could we as humanity at this moment in time in history really communicate to another intelligent life form. So I think it's more useful for us to reflect upon our historical moment in a way, and upon our social, cultural present, rather than a real attempt to communicating. Because I think when you really consider all the elements that are possible in a communication, in intergalactic, I don't know, intelligence communication. I mean, these elements are so difficult to value. You know, I mean, we just don't know what kind of intelligence, what kind of consciousness this intelligence might have, what kind of language they might use. So it's a purely speculative, and so yeah.
Yeah, that's just occurred to me, and just now that you mentioned it, that METI is mostly about us. It's I mean, going through that exercise of asking ourselves, what message would we send to the stars, even if we never send it, or even if there's very little hope that it'll ever be received, right? It's still just like we went through with that exercise with the plaque on the Pioneer spacecraft with Carl Sagan and his team. That was sort of like a rehearsal for this, and that plaque will probably never be found by anyone. But going through that exercise of figuring out what message do we want to send was, I think, really powerful lesson for everyone involved. And so hopefully METI will involve a lot of people, and it will be, and again, even if it's never transmitted, I think it's a good thing to go through.
Yes, I think what I find really interesting about the contemporary form of METI is that we moved quite a lot from, let's say, the Golden Records or Frank Drake's message from Arecibo. I think those messages were really the pioneering messages, and but over the last 40 years, I think people within SETI have been debating a lot the weaknesses of these messages. For example, Frank Drake's message sent from Arecibo target exclusively one form of intelligence, which is mathematical scientific intelligence. And also there was some debate around the content uploaded on the Golden Records, which seems to cut from our history anything which is connected to wars or anything which is... I think there has been some debate around this topic, and perhaps the new message that we will create, I say we because I would like to be directly involved in that, I think will be also including parts, will be reflecting upon all these ethical questions of should we be more honest about our nature, so perhaps also showing that we've gone through quite a lot of power struggle and wars, or should we just focus on positive things or be neutral, perhaps not mentioning any cultural, for example, or religious problems on Earth. So I think all these things are really important to think about, especially, again, I want to stress this again, for really talking about our own culture.
Yeah. And well, what do you think? Should we put our best foot forward, or should we let them know that we have slavery and war and cruelty and?
I think if they are, I really think maybe this is just the idealist part of me. I do think that if they are really evolved, if we are dealing with a truly evolved species, I think they've already they've overcome those problems. So I think they eventually reached a place where they can really cooperate with each other and even look for intergalactic cooperation or interstellar cooperation. So eventually we will get to that point, I think, if we survive this critical moment.
Right, but through that evolutionary process, I don't know, I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me they're likely to go through a very similar struggle that we, in terms of conflict, in terms of exploitation, all the things that you see in nature, predation, and eventually come up to where they realize if we're going to move any further, we have to leave those things behind. But they probably will remember that and know that they went through that. And they may be looking at us like we would look at a 2-year-old child and saying, oh, well, the behavior is okay because it's just a child. Right. At least that's my hope.
This is what I hope so. I think they will think of this as something that they've already overcame. So I don't think they will want to compete with us in those terms. But I think, in my opinion, we should send a message that is not necessarily talking about our history, but maybe we should try and communicate with them also, even in a playful way. There is an artist called Carrie Patterson, but I might be wrong. She has a proposal of sending perfumes into. So she wants to convert perfume and smell into some kind of data that also other species can receive, and so that would be a really interesting way to communicate, for example. Or there is a Japanese artist, again, I don't remember the name, but he transmitted the 3D scan of a body. He is a dancer, so he scanned his own body and transmitted the 3D data of his movement into space. So I think I'm more interested in this kind of messages. And whether we should tell about our problems, I don't know, because I don't think, I'm not sure if they can really understand,
I think, Paul, there's a science fiction school of thought, certainly, that will say no need to let the aliens know how bad we are.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Is that because we're concerned about how bad they are, or do they just want?
I don't know. I mean, I would say, yes, that is a science fiction-y way of looking at it. I would say, what's it all? Let it all hang out. We don't even know whether it's going to be consciousness, that the way we are even capable of understanding consciousness. So, it's.
I'm glad you can understand consciousness, because I've completely failed at that. But I don't think we do understand, or at least agree on what consciousness is. But hopefully, science will get us there someday. Yes. There's a famous movie, right, called "The Day the Earth Stood Still," where the alien comes down, lands in Washington D.C., and comes out and says, "If you don't make peace amongst yourselves, we're going to destroy you." Right. So that's one scenario, that they might be very advanced, but they would destroy us because they think we're going to be bad galactic citizens. But the other scenario is more like that I think is probably even less realistic, is that they're going to come help us become better people. I think they're going to say, solve your own problems, and we think that you're not even going to be much of a threat to us until you can do that. So there's no way that you can have a 1,000,000-year civilization if you don't, or even longer, if you don't achieve some kind of peaceful resolution of conflicts. Right? I mean, at least that's my take on it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes, who knows? I mean, first of all, we have to, where are they? You know, as, the famous question, where are these aliens?
Well, we don't know, right? But we do know that if there's another civilization out there that we can't communicate with, they're probably very long-lived civilization. They've been there a long time. Because if short-lived civilizations, the odds of us being there at the same time they are poor. So it would probably, and if you look at the Drake equation, the only way it really works out is if civilizations reach a kind of meta stability where they can live for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. And that way, they're out there in reasonable numbers. Whereas if they're like us and have only been around for a few hundred years and aren't going to go much longer, then the odds that there's another one out there right now that we could talk to is very poor in our galaxy. So it really boils down to, can you achieve that kind of stability? And if they have, and we're talking to them, then they've gotten a lot further than we have in terms of treating each other kindly, right? So, and probably not slaughtering each other over religion or territory or whatever it is we slaughter people over these days. But but I just kind of wonder if the message that we send should contain any sense of asking for help. What do you think, Gita?
I don't know. So, in fact, I was thinking about the example Daniela was talking about of sending out perfume as or odor as one kind of message, and thinking about the kind of cultural conflicts we have here on Earth based on cultural misunderstandings. I'm thinking, what if perfume means something completely different to another sentient species?
Yeah, what if it's a horrible insult?
Exactly. So I personally would be very, very circumspect about initiating any kind of contact. And if they are the kind of stabilized civilization that I think is very logical to assume they would be, I think they know about us and they may be well leaving us alone for a good reason.
Yes.
Ah, yes. The zoo hypothesis, or that a lot of people put forward, that they don't want us to be involved in their culture or to know about theirs. What do you think, Adam?
I have absolutely no idea why we don't yet see any signs of alien life elsewhere in the galaxy or in the universe. Doesn't really make sense to me, but then why should it?
Well, that's a good point. Why should it make sense? Yes.
It looks like we're alone. I tend to think that there are other life forms out there, probably reasonably close to us in the galaxy, around, on other planets. They're just not higher forms of life. I think higher forms of life like us are going to be rare. And then there's the chances. What are the chances of two such civilizations, us and another similar civilization, existing in close proximity at the same time? It might just be too much of a big coincidence.
Yeah, well, that's something that's what the Drake equation is all about, right? Is that what are the odds of that coincidence? And
yeah, sure. I think with regard to the Drake equation, we're becoming more informed about different values for different things. The number of planets, habitable planets around other stars. We're going to learn a lot about atmospheres around extrasolar planets in the next 10, 20 years. Who knows what we'll learn? Mm-hmm. We'll have quite a good idea of how many Earth-like planets there are. At the moment, we're still guessing, really.
Well, I think we actually have a decent estimate of that. It's way better than we used to, anyway. probably with it. Well,
yeah, it's better than no estimate. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there have been a lot of papers published on that lately. You kind of have to statistically extrapolate from the very tiny samples that we have to date. We'll have a much better idea after TESS and Plato, our missions are complete. But even that, I think it's not going. The number's not going to differ much from where we think it is now, which is probably, and of course, Earth-like isn't necessarily best, but probably it's in the ballpark of 5 to 10%, and based upon what the estimates that have, and so I think we have that's pretty good knowledge of that term. There are 7 terms in the Drake equation. We know 3 of them reasonably well, and the other 4 we're hard at work on the 4th one, but the other 3 we just have no idea. And that's really kind of, so when people say it's improbable, I don't know how they estimate that, right? There's no empirical basis. So we're still have to admit, as Adam says, we just have no idea.
We only need to detect a microbe on or underneath Mars or Enceladus or somewhere with different RNA or DNA. And then we've doubled our samples.
Well, yeah, that would give us a good estimate of the 4th term. Yes, that was abiogenesis is common. That's
it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I mean, it might even, as Paul Davies has pointed out, it might even be on our own planet we could find evidence for that. There may be a shadow biosphere that emerged independently of the one we have. The microbes that we know are a tiny fraction of the microbes that exist. So, because we the ones we know well are the ones we can culture in a petri dish at room temperature. There's a lot of them that could very well be out there that are extremely difficult to find, that have completely radically different biochemistry from us, and after some research we may discover they have a different origin. So, it could be Enceladus, it could be Mars, it could be Venus, it could be right here. Although my suspicion is we find something on Mars that's probably going to be related to us.
Do you think they will find some microbes on Mars?
I don't know if they'll find anything currently alive on Mars or not. David Grinspoon told me, he said, Mars doesn't look like a planet that has life. It doesn't have that. We know what a planet that has life looks like, our planet, and life has taken over the planet. Whereas the chemistry, the atmosphere, everything about that our planet is biogenic in some respect. Whereas Mars, you don't see any evidence of that, or you see very, very little. So right now, it's possible Mars did have life, and we may find, after a lot of research, evidence for that. But will we ever find a living Martian microbe? I don't know. I think we're just as likely to find a Venus microbe. But because we know there are processes taking place in the clouds of Venus that are interesting. It's sort of what they call non-equilibrium chemistry. So there's possible that there's something going on there. We'll find out if we ever get to the clouds and get to fly around in them, which is something that's been proposed. But let's get back to the question though of if we want to communicate with another technological civilization, that's really all we would know, is that they have technology. We wouldn't know anything about their culture or their language. Is there a way to find a universal? Is there something that everybody would understand? Some people say it's mathematics. Some people say it's something else. I think on one of the records we sent into space, we had music. we had Chuck Berry and the Beatles and Bach. I don't know if that would, that would mean anything at all to another species, but maybe it would. Maybe it would tell them something.
Doubtful.
Yes.
I don't know, but I remember listening to this lecture from Harold Pinker, the linguist, and he was talking about Steven Pinker, sorry, and he was talking about this very interesting paradigm, which is that technological advancement or progress is not correlated to language sophistication and language complexity. So, at least on our planet. So cultures that are less and more technologically advanced continue to have languages that are of equal complexity, and there's no correlation between the two. So technology and culture, how those correlate is something that I'm not sure we fully understand even in our little system.
That's
Yes.
a good point.
Also, when Bach composed this music, he was hardly considered an artist. He was considered a technician, actually. So, and we changed completely our opinion about his music in the last few hundred years. So, I think this is all speculation. Again, we don't know if another intelligent life form has ears the way we have them. They might be hearing at different frequencies. So it is really very hard to tell. So, but perhaps, as Adam said, once we will know better the biochemistry of the atmosphere of the planet, perhaps we will be able to understand a bit more about them as well. But something that Gita said, something really important, which is consciousness. I've been doing a lot of work about SETI and consciousness, and I published a few papers about it. I think this is a very important topic that is not addressed enough yet within SETI, because we seem to assume that our mind is a crystal clear window upon the cosmos, but obviously the way we perceive also the physics of the cosmos and everything, science, anything that actually we know about the world through the scientific lens is completely mediated by our limitations, mental limitations. So I think if we don't make also progress in that field, it is really hard to step out of this sort of bubble. And it's like for a dog to understand anything beyond his or her, world. So, and this cognitive shift, I think it's really important. Once we will learn more about consciousness, I think it will be a great tool for understanding other intelligent forms.
Right. Well, I mean, how can we understand consciousness if our understanding is limited by our consciousness?
Exactly. I mean, this is the paradox. I think that
Yes.
It's a normal, but perhaps we will somehow, because throughout the centuries we did manage to always shift perspective. It's like the Copernican revolution, and then now a new revolution that after the discovery that the cosmos is much bigger than our own galaxy. Last century, only 100 years ago, we thought that the universe was just our own galaxy. And we didn't even know how big the galaxy was. And now, after not even 100 years...
I'm sorry, did we lose you, Daniela?
...to make some cognitive shift that will, perhaps, I hope, that will happen.
Oh, okay. By the way, we seem to have lost Adam, but he's coming back. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we humans have successfully wrapped our heads around some pretty difficult things that our ancestors would have found ridiculous, right? I mean, just because the universe wouldn't let us keep our limited concepts, right? As you pointed out, when it was found that the Cepheid variables in another galaxy were indicated the distance to that galaxy by, and it was much, much larger than anyone would have thought at the time. And that was a nearby galaxy. That led to, I think a lot of people just sort of didn't understand the numbers, but enough people did. Enough people said, oh, we live in an extremely large universe that is far, far larger than, and has its own dynamics and its own behavior. That was a concept that I think that probably didn't even hardly existed at all just a few generations before. And now, and then of course there was quantum mechanics, there was relativity, all those things, those concepts, at first only understood by a few people, but now at least widely propagated at some level. I remember when I was a kid, my mother used to tell me everything's relative. That's what Einstein said. And so I guess I'm an optimist in terms of our ability to break outside of whatever cognitive constructs we're raised with, and just because the universe won't let us keep them for forever.
I think one important thing is that, at least for me, the important thing is that it's science that attempts to answer this seemingly unanswerable question. And I'm much happier that science is attempting a metaphysical answer rather than leaving it to metaphysics and philosophy. I feel happier with that. I feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah, of course, the philosophers don't want to be left out, but...
well, they'll jump in, I'm sure.
Well, I think that the philosophers that are relevant are the ones who are plugged into what's going on in science. And,
Yes.
And I'd read a lot of Daniel Dennett, and I find him interesting, partly because he seems to have a very good understanding of where science has gone. And,
Yeah.
And so he's not saying, oh, well, this science isn't important to me. He's saying it is very important, and things like evolution and natural selection are extremely important to understanding our own existence and the meaning. And if you want to ask questions about consciousness, you have to understand evolution and the science of evolution, and that's just to be able to ask the right question. So.
But I think what is important in philosophy, I think, which also I agree with Gita, all scientists should also keep this in mind, is the kind of questioning that they ask. So I think philosophy always tackles problems within science that are somehow limited if only left to the scientists. So it's like, for example, explaining the existence of or non-existence of God by using science. I think philosophy reminds us that that is not possible, because it's just the wrong paradigm. So you cannot use science in that way, because it's simply the wrong. There is a limitation, of course. So, this is only one example of how I think science and philosophy should work together to tackle some topics which are too big for any single human, or to actually address or understand.
Right. Well, I have seen some scientists or science educators like Neil deGrasse Tyson come out and say, well, I don't know what all this philosophy stuff is all about. And and drawing the ire of that community, but also some scientists will step up, like Sean Carroll, and say, oh, no, I think it's important. I think we have to have we want to bring the philosophers in on the big questions, and make sure, because we sometimes are not. It's not that we don't have answers. It's we don't always know how to ask the question, and what is the question that we're trying to answer, and at the big picture level, that's more than a scientific question. It's not less than a scientific question, but it's certainly.
I think more than the question being more than a scientific question, I think it's that the answer will probably be more than science. I think the question can still be scientific and the process can still be scientific, but maybe some comprehension and some answer might be more than science, which brings us back to somewhat where we started, which is this interdisciplinary expression and understanding of the natural world.
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe the Nazis showed us that it's not enough just to be scientific. You need morality as well. You know, there are some things. There are some places science shouldn't go. Pure science could lead to all sorts of evil experiments. I don't like to think what crazy pathways.
Right. Well,
science could go down. Like, you know, reanimating corpses, whatever. We need morality in science for sure, and that's where philosophy comes in.
So you mean in the sort of the ethical guidance for science?
Definitely, yeah.
Well,
scientists left to their own devices could go on. Do you watch Game of Thrones?
No, not much. No.
There's a science like as much of a scientist as you get on Game of Thrones. He reanimates corpses. Mainly, yeah.
Oh.
I think people have always been afraid of science ever since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein way back. There's always been a public, maybe a misconception of the crazy, evil scientist. And it's something that still survives today. People are wary. You see it with genetically modified food. All sorts of science, including astronomy, especially cosmology. Some people don't understand that they're naturally afraid of it.
Well, I mean, I don't know about in Europe, but here in the U.S., we still have struggles over evolution.
Yes, I find that astonishing. I really do.
Because, well, I mean, people.
I just find it funny.
People find their religion threatened by it. Is really what it amounts to.
Yeah.
And not everyone. A lot of theists do not find it threatening, but there's still that backbone of millions who do, and in some areas it's a lot of people. And unfortunately, our textbooks for schools in the U.S. are compromised because of this, because many of the textbooks publishers are afraid to go up against these people. So they will tone down at least especially in the for the younger grades, they will tone down the importance of natural selection and evolution to biology. And when I was a high school student in Texas in the 1970s, we weren't allowed to learn about evolution. I mean, it was theoretically part of the syllabus, but we never. My teacher was afraid to bring it up, and so that there's a lot of people are scared of science, sometimes irrationally. But now Adam raised the issue of the Nazis. They had probably the most technologically were as technologically sophisticated a society as any in the world in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. But they did. The Nazis systematically destroyed their university system, and they were on the way out as an important scientific nation had they stayed in power. But because first thing they did is chased off all the Jews, right? People like Einstein had to leave. So, and then they started making race studies and Nazi ideology a key component of education, which also was very damaging. So, and of course, you had to be politically connected to become an important academic. So, I think that there's people who abuse scientific knowledge and sophistication, but I don't know if there's anything that's inherently moral or immoral about science.
Exactly. In fact, that's what I wanted to say. It's a methodology. There's absolutely no morality to it. It's what you do with what you discover using science that makes it moral, immoral, what have you. Which is also shifting sands, by the way. What was ethical or moral 500 years ago isn't today and will not be 500 years from now.
Oh, even more recently. I mean, we had this famous incident just a few decades ago here in the U.S. where African-American men were not treated for syphilis in an experiment. And you can imagine what happened to them. And this was covered up, but it was not considered a particularly unethical research paradigm in its day. It would be considered that. But
yes.
Or even the experiments that were done on obedient aggression, where they had someone who was under the impression they were shocking another person, and that today would be almost impossible to get past an ethics committee.
Or even the Stanford prison experiment, you couldn't do that today.
No, and so things have changed just in the last generation or two. And I know my wife, she works in but not really human experimentation, but an area where she does have human subjects, and everything they do, every detail has to be reviewed by an ethics committee. So it's become much more stringent than it used to be, and even animal experiments are subject to such review. So. And we can't do things with chimpanzees anymore.
And to talk about it in a slightly callous fashion, but how does that impact some of the research that needs to be done? Some of these ethics, or what we consider now as ethical behavior, how does that impact some of our learning, our understanding, our discovery? Who knows?
Well, it makes it more difficult. But maybe it should be more difficult.
That's a fair point.
Progress will be slower, but there's still progress. You just have to make sure that back in the 1950s here in the U.S., the CIA conducted a lot of human experiments that were wildly unethical, and under the veil of secrecy, no one reviewed the ethics of those experiments. And there are even some cases after the World War II where there were undocumented German prisoners. No one knew they existed. So they were free to experiment with them as much as they wanted, and they did. So, this lack of review and lack of transparency can result in horrible things. So that's something that we want to we want to avoid that, and I think it may be worth the cost in terms of slowing down scientific progress.
Well, it depends if the objective of scientific progress is the collective good or just scientific progress per se. So I think also there is a whole economical aspect of science which is quite important, because usually science is progresses in a certain direction thanks to the economy moving in that direction. And so and now we see a lot of progress in the artificial intelligence, for example, and whether that is going to serve the global community or only a few privileged people, that is also another ethical concerns which some people are raising. So I think, also the philosophical question of what is good and what is not good. I think this is why philosophy is important, because it keeps always asking these questions, this fundamental question of what is ethics. What we probably assume as being globally good, it might not be good for other civilizations or other cultures, for example. So I think science should definitely relate to all these fields of discourse, of research. So again, the interdisciplinarity that we mentioned earlier. But it has to move, in my opinion, progressively with all our global knowledge. So maybe it slows down a little bit because of this, but somehow it shouldn't slip out of our control, because we really don't know how otherwise we can deal with such advanced technology that we cannot control anymore.
Right.
I think it's very hard to kind of find that balance of ethical versus scientific versus progress for everybody. And this is one of my hobby horses. So if I go on too much about it, tell me and I'll stop. But there is a lot of I understand a lot of pushback in American universities in particular on how political correctness is invading a lot of scientific discussion and conversation. One of the examples of that is research into male and female brains, and whether those are intrinsically different or whether those are purely nurture, socialized different. Now, because of the pushback, because of this insistence on what some people would call political correctness, that gender is an artificial construct and so on and so forth, some scientists feel that they're not able to fully explore or get funded for studies that look at the male-female brain differences. And to me, that seems so absurd to allow a so-called ethical consideration of the day to stop looking at questions or answers scientifically. Because what if there is a difference between the male and female brain, which is quantifiable and non-controversial and completely supported by evidence, and that helps us discover, for example, better ways to teach women about STEM subjects, which are different from the way you teach men about STEM subjects? What if that's the difference? So if you're allowing morality of the day or sensitivities of the day to define some of these conversations, these questions, and these scientific queries, I'm not sure I feel very happy about that.
Okay. And I think that's a tough one to wrestle with. And should anything be off limits for inquiry? My intuitive sense of that is no, but you can always kind of come up with an example where something might be a problem. But a lot of these things, you may think that there's a global civilization that will police itself ethically, but I don't think that's really true. I think some things are, unless the science is incredibly expensive to do, like very large particle colliders, then you're going to have people looking into almost everything, either publicly or privately, either in Western nations or in Asian nations. You're going to have somebody doing it, and just like, the United States has tried for 30 or 40 years to go back to the moon and without success. And now China's going to do it. Right. So, and why shouldn't they? Right. So, and things like genetic research or genetic engineering, that can be done by anybody with the competence to set up the lab, and that such people are available worldwide. And some of them will be happy to do it just for the money. So, things are going to be looked into if there's a incentive to do so. And we talked about that with respect to CRISPR recently and gene editing, that even if there's a lot of international hand-wringing about gene editing, still someone's going to do it. And they'll find a way.
Yes, I think that genie is out of the bottle. There's no putting it back.
Yeah. And now, there's a lot of good that can be done that way. I mean, anybody who's ever seen a child with a genetic disease knows that there's an awful lot of good that could be done, and a lot of suffering that could be prevented. So we'll see. We're going to find out, I think, over the long term, what the risks are, and we may not find out what the risks are till it's too late to do anything about it. But now I think we're going to wrap up shortly. I have not had any questions on the Hangout through the Q&A. If you want to get a question in, please do it now, because we're about to wrap up. I know a lot of people are out there keeping an eye on the Juno orbit insertion, but I don't think much is happening there right now. So you can come on in and ask a question. We haven't talked about that today. So what I will do is we won't do recommendations today because I was kind of short notice. Didn't have much time to think about it. So what we'll do is we'll just go around one more time and let everybody have sort of a last word, and then I'll make a few announcements, and we will. I'd like to plug the latest Wow Signal burst, and then we'll say goodbye. So let's start with, let me just check for questions one more time. No questions. Okay. Adam.
Hi, it's been interesting. We need a sense of beauty as humans, without our ability to appreciate art and beauty, we'd be lost, I think, as a species. Life simply wouldn't be worth living, would it? So we need our art, we need science, and we all need to get along. And we need to get going and get ourselves out there into space. But that's a totally different topic.
We have lots of shows. We'll talk about that near term.
Yeah.
Okay. Gita, good to have you back. Any last words?
Yes, I was hoping we would get the time to talk a little bit about art from science as science communication and how it could help with that. And maybe we can keep that for another episode. That might be worth talking about.
Okay, yeah, I think it would be. Probably going to have to wait, but...
yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it was wonderful to be on the panel.
Okay. And Daniela, you get the last word.
I really enjoyed this discussion. Especially the question about ethical and scientific progress. I think there is a lot to be covered there, and I hope we will do more hangouts on this topic in the future. So yes, thanks for having me here, and I really enjoyed. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Daniela. And as Daniela mentioned earlier, she's starting to has contributed to the Wow Signal, and keep an eye out for that. And My only last word is I'm grateful to Daniela for letting me know that my confusion in the face of contemporary art is a good thing. I am, because I remain very confused, but that's okay. That's okay. It's just me. I'm a little thick. So I want to thank everybody. This will be episode 54. It'll be out probably around July 5th, 2016. And today is July 4th, 2016. This is my first completely international panel. I am the only U.S. person on here, so that's good. And we'll do more of these in the future. We usually have to find a time where we can all do it, when I can do it during the day, and then for everybody else it's evening. And so a couple of things. One is, as we mentioned, this is a spin-off of the Wild Signal. We just put out a new burst by Nick Nielsen called The Spore of Civilizations, burst 18. Please check that out. Nick is not here to tell us about it, but just go listen. It's only the whole thing's only about 20 minutes. And the other thing is that we'd love to, if you'd like to participate in this podcast. This is an open participation podcast. Easiest way to find out how to do that, just email unseenpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you on what to do. You can just also go to unseenpodcast.com, and there's a lot of information there. We have an FAQ, and we have about this podcast. We also have a panelist page that shows everybody who's ever appeared on the panel. It's now well over 20 people, and hopefully by the end of the year it'll be over 30 people. And there are some regulars, and there are people that appear occasionally, like Gita, and there are people who appear perhaps once every 2 or 3 months. And you can appear as frequently or infrequently as you choose. You'll get an invitation every 2 weeks, and you decide if you want to appear at that particular show. The topics are not picked by me, by and large. They are picked by the panelists. I sometimes encourage things in a particular direction, but for the most part, the panelists and other participants in the community set the topics. And by the way, I mean, episode 55 does not have a clear topic yet, so please get on there. And if you're a listener and you have a topic you'd like us to cover that we haven't yet, by all means, let us know. And you can do that either by emailing or by commenting on the blog at unseenpodcast.com, or you can go to our listeners community on Google Plus or our subreddit on Reddit. We have a listener subreddit there as well. Let us know what you think. We are very interested in your feedback. We will read all of it. I can't promise you we'll do what you ask, but we will certainly consider it. And so this has been episode 54 of the Unseen Podcast. And I'd like to thank our panel one last time. Adam.
Thanks, Paul.
And Gita.
Thank you, Paul. Wonderful to have to be here again.
And Daniela.
Thanks, Paul, and everyone in the panel. It was great.
Okay, well, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Well, actually, a little bit less than 2 weeks, episode 55. And it's not too late, by the way, to get on the panel for that show. So let us know. So this is the Unseen Podcast. More information at unseenpodcast.com. And goodbye for now.